She's never done anything in her life. That's what my mom said out loud on Christmas Eve. But when my mom saw me on the cover, she asked, "Is she the owner?" "Hi, my name is Maya." The table was full, roasted turkey in the center, twinkling lights above, and forced smiles all around. Every year, Christmas at my mother's house looked the same on the outside. Carefully arranged, perfectly presented. But inside, we were just a family held together by tradition, not affection. I had shown up mostly out of obligation, wearing the same polite smile I wore every holiday. I knew my place, quiet, invisible, the one they barely talked about. Dinner was halfway through when she said it. She's never done anything with her life. No anger, no sarcasm, just fact, at least in her mind. She said it between bites of cranberry sauce, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. I was sitting 2 seats away, close enough to hear every word, and she didn't flinch, didn't even glance in my direction. The silence that followed was louder than anything anyone could have said. My sister shifted in her seat. My brother-in-law cleared his throat. My dad chuckled softly, like maybe he thought it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was a statement, a verdict, and no one objected. I didn't say a word. I just kept slicing the turkey, pretending my hands weren't shaking slightly, pretending the comment didn't land exactly where she meant it to, somewhere deep in my chest, in that space where love should have lived. That was always her way. If she couldn't control me, she'd erase me, reduce me to nothing until everyone else believed it too. I used to think it was my fault, that maybe I really was disappointing. I didn't follow the path she laid out. I didn't marry young, didn't have kids, didn't become a teacher like she hoped. I had ideas that didn't fit into the family mold, and dreams she never bothered to ask about. I spent years apologizing without knowing why, trying to shrink myself to make her more comfortable. But that night, something shifted. I don't know if it was the way her voice landed so flat and final, or the way no one defended me, but I realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. Done explaining. Done waiting. Done hoping she'd see me. Because the truth is, I had been building something. Quietly. Relentlessly. Every time she looked past me, I worked harder. Every dismissive comment became fuel. And while they sat around judging my nothing, I was learning how to turn silence into structure. No one in that room knew I'd started my own company 2 years earlier. No one asked. I never offered. I had learned a long time ago that sharing dreams in that house was like handing someone a glass ornament and watching them smash it without blinking. So I kept my world separate. My little apartment became my headquarters, my sanctuary. I built from scratch, made mistakes, fixed them, and kept going. Late nights with my laptop on the kitchen table, early mornings researching how to pitch to investors. I taught myself how to read contracts, manage risk, handle rejection. There were weeks I lived on instant noodles just to keep the lights on in the office I rented above a laundromat. But I never stopped. Not once. Some people build to prove others wrong. I built to prove myself right. And no, it wasn't flashy. There were no big announcements or family updates. Just quiet progress. Brick by brick. Step by step. And by the time that Christmas dinner happened, I had already signed the deal that would change everything. The irony? The announcement was scheduled to air the following week. A Sunday feature on local entrepreneurs making national impact. They filmed it a month before in my office with my face on camera and my name bold in the headline. The woman behind Hope Bridge. My name. My story. And none of them saw it coming. That night, after dinner, I drove home in silence. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clear on who I was. Clear on who they were. And clear on the fact that some people only clap when the audience is watching. I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and stared out the window at the city lights. I thought about all the times I begged for her approval, all the ways I tried to make myself worthy in her eyes. And then I smiled because finally I didn't need her to see me. The world would. She had no idea her little nothing was about to be someone. And not just someone. The name on the front page. When I was little, I used to think I was just quiet. That maybe the reason no one listened to me was because I didn't speak loudly enough. I'd watched my sister steal the spotlight with ease. Every word she said celebrated like it was gold. She was everything my mother ever wanted. Elegant, ambitious, married young, with a career that fit nicely into holiday conversations. She was polished and predictable, easy to brag about. I, on the other hand, was the family mystery, or maybe just the family embarrassment no one wanted to acknowledge. Growing up, I learned to read a room before I ever learned to read a book. I could feel the shift in the air when I entered, the way conversations tapered off, as if whatever was being said wasn't meant for me. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't troubled. I just didn't fit. And in a house like ours, if you didn't fit, you disappeared. I didn't get into fights or slam doors or scream to be heard. I got quieter, smaller. I found corners to exist in, physically and emotionally. Every once in a while, I'd try to speak up. At dinner, I'd mention something I was working on, a book I liked, a course I was taking online. My mother would nod, distracted. My father would change the subject. And my sister? She'd find a way to turn it into a joke. Not cruel, just dismissive. Like whatever I said couldn't possibly matter. And so, little by little, I stopped saying anything at all. But silence is deceptive. It can look like weakness when, in truth, it's the space where strength is born. I spent years listening, watching, learning how people move, how power works. I became observant, not because I was timid, but because I had no choice. I knew I'd never be handed a platform in that house. I'd have to build one, quietly, alone. I got my first job at 19, answering phones at a real estate office. No one in my family noticed. I remember mentioning it once at dinner, and my mother said, "Just don't let it distract you from finding a real path." As if earning my own money, showing up every morning, learning the ropes from scratch, meant nothing. But that job taught me everything. I watched how deals were made, how people pitched ideas, how value was negotiated. I paid attention to the clients, what they needed, what they feared. And I realized something. People don't always need more resources. Sometimes they just need someone to see them, to believe in what they're capable of. That idea stuck with me. I left that job after 3 years and took another at a nonprofit. Same reaction from my family, disinterest. "You should go back to school," my mother said. "That kind of work doesn't pay." But for the first time, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I met people who were overlooked, underestimated, forgotten, just like I had been. I saw how policy and poverty wrapped around people like chains. And I started wondering if there was a way to build something different. Something that didn't just patch the problem, but rewired the entire system. That's when Hope Bridge was born. It wasn't even a company at first, just a project. A spreadsheet on my laptop. A few notes scribbled on napkins. I mapped out ideas during bus rides, during breaks, in cafes with bad coffee, and even worse lighting. I didn't have investors. I didn't have connections. But I had clarity. I knew what I wanted to create. An ecosystem that combined mentorship, microloans, and business education for people society labeled as unskilled. I spent weekends building the website myself, watching YouTube tutorials on coding, branding, marketing. I registered the business in my name. With $200 to my name and a fire in my chest, I couldn't put out. When my sister posted pictures from her honeymoon in Santorini, I was learning how to write grant proposals. When my parents hosted a barbecue to celebrate her promotion, I was attending a virtual seminar on sustainable community entrepreneurship. And still, not a single word from them. "No, how's work going?" "No, what have you been up to?" Nothing. They never asked because they assumed the answer wouldn't impress them. And maybe that hurt more than if they had mocked me outright. Because indifference, it's colder than hate. It tells you you're not even worth the trouble of judgment. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I started seeing results, slow at first, like cracks forming in old cement. A young woman I helped launch her own cleaning business. A single father who used our microloan to open a food cart. A community garden that turned into a weekend market. It was happening. Quietly. Without applause. But it was happening. And still I didn't tell them. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need their approval anymore. I had spent years chasing that look of pride from my mother, the nod of recognition. And at some point I stopped waiting. I started pouring that energy into people who actually believed in change, who needed a chance, not permission. I became invisible in my own home, but visible in the lives I was helping shape. And while my name didn't matter around the dinner table, it was beginning to carry weight elsewhere. In boardrooms, on community boards, in grant meetings. My silence wasn't emptiness, it was strategy. The kind of strategy that doesn't just survive neglect, it transforms it into purpose. My apartment wasn't much. A narrow hallway that led into a living room barely wide enough for a couch and a desk. The kitchen tiles were cracked, the radiator clicked every night like it was clearing its throat, and the windows whistled in winter. But it was mine. No one rolled their eyes when I talked. No one made jokes about real jobs or asked when I'd finally do something worthwhile. That small, imperfect space gave me something I never had at home: permission to take up space. It was in that apartment that Hope Bridge became real. I pushed the couch to the side and dragged in a folding table I'd found on clearance. That became my workspace. I set up a whiteboard, filled notebooks with plans, and used sticky notes to track goals, client calls, website updates, funding applications. The walls weren't just painted beige anymore. They were covered in dreams I could finally say out loud, even if no one else was around to hear them. I worked 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. There were moments I forgot to eat, skipped sleep, ignored birthdays. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to build something that could stand. Every dollar mattered. Every decision could move things forward or ruin everything. I didn't have room for mistakes, but I made them anyway. Bad partnerships, messy invoices, grant applications rejected with generic responses. And still I kept going. People assume that when you build something successful, there's a moment you know it's going to work. I didn't have that. I had panic, doubt, imposter syndrome whispering in my ear that maybe my mother had been right all along, that I was just playing dress up, that any day now, someone would knock on my door and tell me I wasn't allowed to keep dreaming this big. But then I'd get an email, a woman from Texas asking if we could expand our mentorship program, a teenager from Chicago who watched our videos and started her own resale business, a retired man who wanted to invest, not in returns but in people. And slowly, the noise in my head began to quiet. Not because I stopped being afraid, but because I finally understood something they never taught in my house. Fear doesn't mean you stop. It just means you care enough to keep walking anyway. I remember one night, sitting on the floor, surrounded by printouts and contracts and unanswered emails. It was past midnight. The heater was out again. I had $78 in my checking account, 3 days until rent was due, and a proposal that needed to be submitted before sunrise. And for a moment, I almost shut it all down. I hovered over the delete button on my pitch document. I thought about calling my mom, not for money, just to hear her voice say something, anything that would remind me I was still someone worth believing in. But I didn't. Instead, I got up, made a cup of coffee with the last of the grounds, wrapped myself in 2 blankets, and kept writing. Because I wasn't doing this for her. Not anymore. I was doing it for every person who had been told they weren't enough. Every person who had been dismissed, ignored, laughed at, underestimated. People like me. That proposal got approved. And the funding that came with it allowed me to hire my first part-time assistant, a woman named Carla, who had been unemployed for 2 years after aging out of foster care. She showed up every morning like this job was oxygen. She organized things I didn't even know needed organizing. She believed in the mission so deeply that I started to believe in myself more just by being around her. Hope Bridge wasn't just an idea anymore. It had a heartbeat. We started hosting small workshops, 6 people at a time, sitting in that same living room with laptops on their knees and notebooks open. I taught them how to write a business plan, how to calculate margins, how to register a brand name. I taught what I had learned the hard way, and they absorbed every word like it was gold. Because when you've been left out long enough, any door that opens feels like a miracle. I didn't tell my family about any of it. Not when we moved the workshops to a rented co-working space downtown. Not when a local paper ran a tiny piece on our success stories. Not even when I was invited to speak at a panel on sustainable entrepreneurship. They were still busy comparing wedding venues for my sister, debating kitchen backsplash styles, and the best preschools for a baby that hadn't even been born yet. I wasn't angry anymore. just removed, detached, like I had crossed a bridge and they were still standing on the other side, unaware it even existed. Sometimes I'd wonder if they would have been proud of me if I had just followed the script. If I had married a banker, moved to the suburbs, posted carefully curated family photos on Facebook. But then I'd look at what I'd built, at the people who now had hope again, at the communities we were beginning to touch. And I knew I didn't need them to understand. I just needed to keep building. That room, the one no one in my family ever visited, had become more than an apartment. It was a launching pad, a sanctuary, a silent witness to every failure and every spark of triumph. I owed it more than I owed anyone else, because it never asked me to be anything other than exactly who I was. And maybe that's what home is supposed to feel like. I never had anyone clap for me. No one cheered when I made my first sale. No one popped champagne when the website finally went live after weeks of coding and crashing. There were no flowers, no cards, no "we're so proud of you" texts. I remember staring at the screen the day we hit our first real milestone, 10 clients enrolled, each one starting their own venture with tools we provided. I leaned back, hands trembling, heart pounding, and for a second, I looked around like someone might burst through the door and say, "You did it!" But the room stayed quiet, so I whispered it to myself, "You did it!" And in that whisper, I found a truth no one ever taught me. Sometimes you have to be the only witness to your own becoming. Sometimes the applause doesn't come from outside, it comes from survival. From waking up every day and showing up for a dream no one else can see. It's not glamorous. It's lonely, but it's real. I started keeping small mementos, emails from clients, hand-drawn thank you notes from their kids, photos of market stalls and home offices they built with our help. I printed them, taped them to the wall next to my desk. Not to brag, to remember. Because when you don't have a crowd reminding you of your worth, you build one out of gratitude. Every piece of paper on that wall was proof that I wasn't just trying, I was impacting. That's what kept me going during the months when everything felt like it might fall apart. The times when funding didn't come through, when clients ghosted, when the power was shut off because I used the bill money to pay a subcontractor who couldn't afford to wait. I'd stare at those notes and remember that this work mattered, even if no one around me thought I did. My sister once joked at a family brunch that I must have a lot of free time since I didn't have a husband or kids. I smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't sting. What I wanted to say was, I run a business. I'm changing lives. I work harder than you know. But I stayed quiet because I knew no amount of explanation would change the image they had of me. And honestly, I was tired of trying. There's a special kind of strength that grows in isolation. Not the kind that shows off in motivational quotes or workout selfies, but the quiet kind, the one that holds you together when your confidence cracks and no one's there to patch it up. I learned how to sit in my own doubt and still move forward. I learned how to wake up to silence and still hear purpose. People assume confidence is loud, but for me, it was built in whispers. Whispers like, just one more email, just one more call, just one more day. And every day I chose to keep going, I laid another brick. Not just in the business, but in myself. I wasn't just building Hope Bridge. I was rebuilding the part of me that had been broken by years of feeling invisible. Eventually, we started to grow faster. Word of mouth spread. Clients referred friends. Community leaders started reaching out. I still remember the first time someone called and said, "I heard you help people who don't fit anywhere else." That sentence stayed with me because that's what I had been my whole life, someone who didn't fit. And now that was our mission, to be the place for everyone who had been told no, not yet, or worse, you're not enough. We partnered with a women's shelter, then a reentry program, then a high school dropout recovery center. Every time I pitched our model, I could see the disbelief in their eyes until I showed them the numbers, the photos, the stories. And suddenly, the woman who once never did anything with her life was becoming a trusted voice in rooms I never thought I'd be allowed to enter. Still, I didn't tell my family. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was protection. Maybe I just couldn't bear the idea of them seeing me only after the headlines, after the recognition, after someone else stamped their approval on what I had built alone. I didn't want to be their redemption story. I didn't want to hear them say, "We always knew," when I knew for a fact they didn't. They didn't ask how I was paying my bills. They didn't notice when I stopped showing up to birthdays. They never wondered why I seemed more tired, more focused, more distant. But distance became my sanctuary. It gave me perspective. It gave me space to grow into someone I actually liked. For the first time, I wasn't trying to win anyone over. I was building something that mattered. And that was enough. Carla started calling me boss, half joking, half serious. The interns looked up to me like I had the answers. I didn't, but I was willing to find them. And that, I told them, was the whole point. Not perfection, just persistence, just belief, just showing up, especially when no one's clapping. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back sessions, I stood in front of my wall of notes and cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life I felt seen. Not by my family, not by the world, but by me. And I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to believe in me anymore. I had already become the witness, the believer, the voice that said, "You are doing something incredible. Keep going." And I did. It started small. A podcast mentioned us during an episode about grassroots innovation. Then a local business blog asked for an interview. I sat in my bedroom with a ring light clipped to my nightstand and a plant behind me to make the background look less sad. I wore a blazer over pajama pants and answered every question with the kind of practiced calm that comes from building something in silence. They asked about our mission, our process, the impact we were making. I spoke clearly, carefully, like someone who knew her words finally mattered. The article went live a week later. The title read, "Hope Bridge, Empowering the Overlooked with Tools, Not Pity." And under it, my name, full and proud. For the first time, it wasn't hidden in a signature or buried in a footer. It was bold, centered, mine. No one in my family saw it. Or if they did, no one mentioned it. And I told myself that was fine. I didn't need their validation. But still, I checked my phone a little too often that week, hoping, half expecting, wanting to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone would reach out. Hey, I saw this. That's amazing. Anything. But the screen stayed quiet. And that silence, after everything, still managed to hurt. So I moved on. I poured everything into the next stage of the work. We rebranded the site, got our first fiscal sponsor, built a small advisory board. Every move felt like unlocking a new level in a game no one else believed I was even playing. But now, people were starting to notice. Foundations began calling. Local leaders wanted meetings. And soon, I found myself in conversations I used to only imagine, pitching our model to people in suits in offices with big glass windows and espresso machines that cost more than my rent. The name, Hope Bridge, started circulating in places where real decisions were made. But no one knew how to say my last name. It was foreign sounding, too long for them to bother, too unfamiliar to be respected. And yet that same name was now showing up on panel invitations, contract headers, podcast descriptions. It became a running joke in meetings. "Sorry, I don't want to butcher it," they'd say. Or, "You're the founder, right? Miss H." And I'd smile and correct them gently. I wasn't offended. I was amused. Because the same name they struggled to pronounce, the one my family never took seriously, was now appearing on panel invitations, contract headers, podcast descriptions. It was a name people were beginning to associate with change. But still, to my mother, I was just the one who never did anything. I didn't correct her. I didn't bring it up. There was something strangely powerful about being unknown in the very space you used to fight to be seen. I no longer needed to explain. I didn't have to hand out updates like business cards. I just let them live in their version of me while I built my own. One afternoon, I got a call from a national publication. They were doing a series on women leading innovation in underrepresented communities. They wanted to feature Hope Bridge. They wanted me on the cover. At first, I laughed. Then I cried. Then I asked if they were sure. They were. They sent a photographer. He showed up with lights, backdrops, and a stylist who kept trying to get me into heels. I stuck with boots. We shot for hours inside my tiny office and outside by the mural a local artist had painted for our first anniversary. The mural read, "Build quietly. Let the impact make the noise. It felt right. The issue was scheduled to hit stands the week after Christmas. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends. Not my team. Not even Carla. I just waited, like a secret sitting on the edge of release. Because I knew once it was out, I couldn't go back to being invisible again. And a part of me was ready. The day the magazine dropped, my inbox exploded. Old classmates, former bosses, strangers from cities I'd never been to. Everyone wanted to talk, congratulate, collaborate. For the first time, my name wasn't something to skip over or mispronounce. It was a headline, a byline, a brand. That evening, I stopped by a bookstore just to see it with my own eyes. There it was, front shelf, my face slightly too glossy, my story folded into neat columns and hopeful pull quotes. I picked up a copy, held it like it might shatter in my hands, and smiled at the quiet teenage version of me, still living somewhere deep inside. The one who used to write business plans in a spiral notebook under her bed. I wanted to tell her, look, they know your name now. As I walked to the counter, the cashier looked at the cover, then at me, then back again. Is this you? She asked, eyes wide. I nodded. She just said, that's so cool, and rang it up without saying anything else. It was simple, but it was enough. I sat in my car afterward and stared at the magazine in my lap. Not because I needed the attention, but because, for the first time, the story being told was mine. Not edited by someone else. Not dismissed or downsized or cut short by people who didn't understand it. My name was finally something that didn't need to be corrected, explained, or defended. It stood on its own. The day after Christmas always felt strange, like the air still carried the weight of things left unsaid. That year, it felt heavier than usual. I had gone to dinner with the family, same as always. Same tablecloth, same playlist humming in the background. Same tired questions asked out of obligation, not curiosity. No one mentioned my work. No one asked how I was doing. But they asked my sister what color she was thinking for the baby's room, and whether her husband's new car came with heated seats. I didn't blame them. That kind of neglect isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's just habit. Sometimes people learn to see you as small, and once they do, they stop looking for anything more. So I sat through the evening like I had 100 times before. I brought a bottle of wine. I laughed at the appropriate moments. I helped clear the plates. When my mother made another passive remark about how not everyone needs to chase big things, I nodded politely and took another bite of pie. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my face would be on the cover of a magazine in 4 days. That thought kept me warm, because I didn't need to argue anymore. I didn't need to defend myself or drop hints, or hope that someone might finally see me. All I had to do was wait, quietly, like I always had. The week between Christmas and New Year's has a strange kind of stillness to it. Everyone's in limbo, recovering from the holiday, waiting for the clock to strike midnight and give them permission to start over. For me, that week felt like standing at the edge of something enormous, knowing the ground was about to shift but not telling anyone yet. Like holding on to a secret you're finally ready to share, not because you want attention, but because you're done hiding. I spent most of that week at the office. Carla was visiting her family. The team was off. The building was quiet. I liked it that way. I lit a candle on my desk, made tea, and sat in the space I had built from nothing. I looked around and thought of every moment I had almost quit. Every night, I cried into the couch. Every grant rejection. Every ignored message. Every meal I skipped so the lights would stay on. And I let myself feel it, not with bitterness, but with awe, because I had made it to the other side. Not loud, not fast, but fully. The call started coming 2 days before the magazine hit the stands. An editor at a national news outlet asked if I'd consider writing a guest column. A college professor wanted to know if I'd speak to his class. A foundation that once ignored my proposal now asked if I'd be open to a conversation. Suddenly, I was getting invites to rooms I used to pace outside of, hoping someone would crack the door open. And still I said nothing to my family. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had learned that sharing things too early only invited doubt. And I wasn't interested in defending my story to people who had never been curious about it in the first place. I wanted the truth to arrive without explanation. to land in their world the way it had lived in mine for years, undeniable. On the evening before the issue dropped, I got a text from an old college acquaintance I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Just saw the preview. You look powerful as hell. Congrats. I stared at the message, read it twice, and smiled. Not because she had reached out, but because she had used the word powerful. No one had ever described me that way before. Not even me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining what would happen the next day. Would my mother call? Would my sister pretend she had known all along? Would someone in the family group chat send a link with a question mark and nothing else? Or would they stay silent like always? Either way, it didn't matter, because the story was no longer something I had to beg to be heard. It was out there, in print, in public, with photographs and quotes and hard data backing up. I had built something that stood without their permission, and it would stand whether they clapped or not. The next morning, I woke up early, bought coffee, walked to the bookstore. I didn't need to, it was already delivered to my office, but I wanted the moment. I wanted to feel the weight of the magazine in my hands, to see it sitting on a shelf where anyone could reach it, where a stranger could pick it up, flip the pages, and find me. When I got there, it was already on display. Row 2, second column. There I was, smiling, confident, not performing, just being. The headline read, Quiet Power, the Woman Behind Hope Bridge. My chest tightened, not with fear, with peace. It had arrived. On time. On record. And all I had to do was breathe. Later that afternoon, I opened Instagram and saw that the magazine had posted the cover. Comments were flooding in. Mentions. Shares. Old clients tagging their friends. She helped me. This changed my life. I know her. She's real. And buried in the comments, one from a familiar name I hadn't seen in a while. My sister. No words, just an emoji. Eyes wide open. It was a cousin who sent her the magazine. Not out of support, not even with a kind message. Just a blurry photo in the family group chat with a casual, "Isn't this her?" The cover was already starting to circulate online, and someone had spotted it at the airport bookstore. The message came in just after dinner, while she was cleaning up the kitchen. The photo showed my face, my name, the headline in bold. And for a moment, she thought it had to be a mistake. She asked aloud, turning the phone in her hand. She's the owner? She didn't say my name. I don't think she even knew how to reconcile the version of me she had created with the woman on that page. For so many years, I had been the girl who couldn't hold a job, the one who never brought a date, never asked for anything, never talked about herself. She thought she knew everything I wasn't. She never stopped to wonder who I might actually be. I wasn't there, but I can imagine the silence that followed. The way my sister might have furrowed her brow. The way my father probably tried to minimize it. Oh, those magazines, they always exaggerate. The way no one quite knew what to say because the story was now in ink and ink doesn't flinch. That weekend, the full article hit the web. My inbox nearly collapsed. I got emails from women across the country, messages from strangers who felt seen, who said the story gave them permission to believe in themselves again. Former mentors who had once overlooked me now wanted to reconnect. Even one of my old high school teachers sent a message. I knew you were quiet, but I should have known that meant something was brewing. And still nothing from my family. Not a call, not a text, just silence, as if saying nothing could undo the fact that now everyone else saw me. I went about my weekend like I always did. Grocery shopping, emails, Sunday prep. But everywhere I turned, someone recognized me. A woman at the coffee shop leaned across the counter and said, "That article?" Gave me chills. A man in the elevator asked if I'd really started everything from my living room. I nodded and smiled. There was no need to explain anymore. The story had done that for me. Monday morning, Carla came in holding a print copy like it was made of gold. "Boss," she said, "you didn't tell me it was this big." I just laughed and hugged her. "I guess it's real now," I said. But the truth was it had always been real. They just hadn't been watching. Later that day, my phone rang. The screen showed my mother's name. I stared at it for a long moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hopeful. I just didn't know what she would say. After everything, after years of being overlooked, doubted, dismissed, I didn't know if I even wanted to hear her try to explain it all away. But I answered. There was a pause before she spoke. Her voice was slower than usual, a little quieter. I saw the magazine, she said. I waited. Another pause. You really built all that? It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't wonder. It was confusion, as if she couldn't reconcile the woman in the article with the daughter who had sat across from her every Christmas, quietly cutting turkey while everyone else told stories. It was the first time she seemed to consider that maybe she had never really seen me at all. I did, I said simply. There was more silence. And then she said it. I didn't know you had it in you, and that was it. Nat, I'm proud of you. Nat, I was wrong. Just surprise. As if what I'd become was an accident, not the result of 1,000 deliberate choices. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because even now, with the whole world watching, she still couldn't just say she was proud. She had to make it sound like a surprise. Like my success was a trick I'd pulled off while she wasn't looking. And maybe that's exactly what it was. We didn't talk long. She asked a few surface-level questions, careful not to dig too deep. I could hear the discomfort in her tone, the way her words tripped over themselves trying to sound supportive. But support isn't something you can fake once the lights are on. You either saw the person before the spotlight, or you didn't. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and let the moment sink in. She knew. They all did now. And even if they never said the words, even if they never gave me the validation I used to chase, it didn't matter anymore. Because the moment she asked, "Is that the owner?" everything shifted. I had become someone they couldn't ignore. Not through arguments. Not through proving points at family dinners. But through persistence. Through building. Through showing up every day when no one was clapping. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to break the silence. I just needed to keep doing the work until the silence broke itself. And it did. The invitation came in a thick white envelope with my name embossed in gold. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe meant for someone else. But there it was, a formal request for me to attend the Civic Impact Awards Gala. Hope Bridge had been chosen as one of 3 organizations to receive special recognition for community leadership. They wanted me to speak, to stand on stage, to tell my story. I held the envelope in my hands for a long time. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure who I was going to bring. For years, I had imagined this moment. The one where I'd finally be invited to something that mattered. Something where the applause wasn't just for being present, but for actually making a difference. And every time I imagined it, I pictured myself scanning the crowd for a familiar face. My mother, my sister, someone from the family who would nod at me, proud, maybe with tears in their eyes, realizing they'd been wrong. But now that the moment had arrived, I didn't want that anymore. Because something had shifted. I no longer needed them in the room to feel valid. I no longer felt like I owed them a seat at my table just because we shared blood. There's a difference between being included and being invited. And I had spent too many years trying to include people who had no interest in knowing who I really was. So I didn't invite them. Not out of spite. Not as punishment. But because peace has a price and mine was silence. Space. Distance from the voices that once made me small. That night, I wanted to stand in the fullness of what I had built without shrinking to make anyone else comfortable. The night of the gala, I wore a dark green suit. No dress. No heels. Just something that felt like me. Strong, tailored, simple. Carla was my +1. She nearly cried when I asked her. She said, "You've changed my life." And I told her, "You helped me believe in mine." We walked into that ballroom like we belonged, because by then we did. The room was filled with people I once thought were unreachable. City leaders, CEOs, journalists, policymakers. The kind of people who used to ignore my emails, who used to say things like, "Great idea, but not a fit for us." Now they stood in line to shake my hand. Now they listened when I spoke. They played a short video about Hope Bridge before I went on stage. Footage of our workshops. Testimonials from clients. A clip of me working late at the office, typing with a coffee cup in hand. And then a quote I had forgotten I ever said in an interview. I started this because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked. And I never wanted anyone to feel that way again. The audience stood. They clapped before I even said a word. And in that moment, I didn't think about who wasn't there. I thought about every person we had helped launch a business, every young girl who had walked into one of our programs unsure of herself and walked out taller. I thought about the teenage version of me, hiding in the back of family dinners, wondering if she would ever be good enough to be heard. I walked up to the podium and looked out into the crowd, not for someone I recognized, but for someone who needed to hear what I was about to say. I didn't talk about numbers or strategies. I talked about being underestimated, about growing in the cracks where no one expected anything to bloom, about what it means to keep showing up even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. I told them that the hardest part of the journey wasn't building the business. It was building myself in the absence of applause, in the absence of belief. And I ended with this. Sometimes the people closest to you won't see your light until the rest of the world is already lit by it. And when that happens, don't dim it to make them more comfortable. Let it burn. Let it shine so bright that even they can't deny it anymore. When I stepped off the stage, someone placed the award in my hands. Heavy glass, etched with my name. My real name, the one they used to mispronounce, the one they ignored for years. Now it was center stage. Now it was undeniable. Later that night, back at home, I took off my shoes and sat on the floor of my living room, holding that award in my lap. No music, no celebration, just me and the quiet. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that feels empty. It was the kind that feels earned. I thought about calling my mother, just to tell her how it went, just to say you were right. I didn't follow your path. I made my own. But I didn't, because that night wasn't about her. It was about me. And for the first time, that was enough. It's strange how life keeps moving, even after everything changes. One moment, your name is a whisper barely spoken at your own dinner table. The next, it's printed on glass awards, echoed in conference halls, written on the side of buildings you helped renovate. But even with all of that, dishes still pile up in the sink. You still forget to buy coffee filters. Your heater still clicks at night like it always did. Fame, or whatever version of it I had, didn't make me feel different. But peace did. I started spending more time walking to work instead of driving. There was something grounding about feeling the pavement under my shoes, watching the neighborhood shift block by block. Kids on bikes, corner stores opening, bus drivers waving like they knew me now. Maybe they did. Or maybe they just recognized something in me that I had spent a lifetime hiding. Presence. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The emails still came. Invitations. Opportunities. Mentorship requests. I took what I could, passed the rest to my growing team. Carla was now our operations director. She had her own office, her own assistant. I'd watch her lead meetings with a confidence that reminded me of myself, but only after I'd stopped asking for permission to be taken seriously. Hope Bridge expanded to 2 more cities that year, then 4, then 7. We hired more trainers, partnered with more organizations, built a network of people who knew what it meant to be invisible, and decided to be the ones who saw others. And still, I never raised my voice. That's the part most people don't understand. They think change comes from noise, from taking up space with volume. But for me, it came from standing still when others wanted me to disappear. From choosing not to yell back, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew silence, when chosen, could echo louder than any speech. My mother called again. A few times, actually. Always short conversations. Polite. Careful. Like she wasn't sure where she stood with me anymore. I answered when I felt like it. Not out of coldness. Just clarity. I had forgiven her a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't always mean return. Sometimes it just means freedom. She asked if I'd come to the family reunion in June. I said I'd think about it. I didn't go. Not because I was bitter, but because there's a difference between healing and pretending. I had done the work to become whole. And I wouldn't tear myself into pieces again just to fit back into a version of me they still expected to find. Instead, I went to a neighborhood library on the edge of the city, the kind of place that still smelled like old books and warm dust. They were hosting a community fair, and one of our former clients was launching her first tutoring business in the basement classroom she'd rented with help from our microloan. I sat in the back while she introduced herself to the crowd. Nervous, excited, glowing. Afterward, she hugged me, told me that she still had the sticky note I'd written for her during one of our sessions. You are not small. You are starting. That's when it hit me. I had become the person I used to need. Not the most powerful, not the loudest, but steady, safe, certain. Someone who saw the unseen, who listened to the quiet, who didn't require you to shout to be worth hearing. A few months later, we launched a new division of Hope Bridge, one focused entirely on young women in transition. Out of school, out of work, out of direction. We called it the Quiet Rise, because that's what it had been for me. Not a dramatic leap, not a viral success, just a quiet, steady climb that no one noticed until they had to. The launch was small, just a few folding chairs, a rented hall, and a slideshow. But when I got up to speak, I looked around at the room, full of girls who looked like I once did, and I told them the truth. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be flashy to be powerful. You just have to keep showing up, even when no one claps. Especially when no one claps. That's how you build something real. That's how you rise. They nodded. They smiled. Some of them cried. Not because I said anything magical, but because they saw in me a reflection of who they could become, and maybe who they already were. That night, I walked home alone. No cameras, no headlines, just me and the city and the sound of my own footsteps. I passed by a store window and saw my reflection. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't question what she was worth. Because I knew I didn't need applause. I didn't need approval. I didn't even need them to say my name right. I had become a voice that didn't need to shout. They used to say I never did anything with my life. Now my silence speaks louder than they ever did.